from a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to be the life of your next dance party by putting your face in front of that smoke machine. And now, the podcast host who's got an outdoor smoke machine he'd like to share, Pete Dominic.
Oh, yeah, you nailed it today, Pico, because the entire Northeast and all the way down to, like, Virginia Beach is covered in a dangerous haze, a dangerous orange haze. And you know what orange haze means. Indictments are sure to come. See what I did there? I'll hit that in the news if you don't know what I'm talking about. But first, got to tell you, I have an amazing guest today. It's the great Mick West joining me for, I think, just a second time ever. He's a writer, investigator, coder, conspiracy theory, myth debunker, communicates science amazingly, and debunks false conspiracy theories all the time on Twitter at Mick West. Escaping the Rabbit Hole is his book, and it is good, and he is good. I spoke with him about the latest UFO story getting a whole bunch of attention from, quote, whistleblower David Grush, who is a former military Air Force veteran. And it is a good conversation. A lot of you, I think, are going to be interested in this. Maybe some of you aren't. I certainly was. But hey, if you'd rather something else, I've also dropped my conversation with Bill Boyle for an additional podcast where we talk about, speaking of conspiracies, who blew up the dam in Ukraine? Was it the Russians? Was it the Ukrainians? Was it not blown up at all? Well, Bill Boyle will tell you exactly who he thinks it is. So if you'd rather listen to that show, that should be loaded up in your queue wherever you get your podcasts, or if you're listening on Patreon around the same time this episode drops. I think it's just something I'm doing to both inflate my podcast download numbers, as well as a lot of people giving me feedback that they like these episodes that are shorter and that I get right to the point on. I'm going to be doing a lot more of that just to mix it up. And who cares? You know, the more content, the better. I'm good at getting smart people on, preparing to talk with them, posting it, editing it, turning it around, and getting it out there for you to listen to and learn along with me. That's what we do here at Stand Up each and every day. By we, I mean me. In a shed. And without your support, it could not happen. So thank you very much for listening, for subscribing, and sign up for a paid subscription at standupwithpete.com or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. By the way, Patreon sucks. It's a terrible service, but it's the best of the worst. And if people want to pay me in other ways, I'm going to set up a different system. You can even Venmo me the money or send a check, and you can support the show and my work that way as well. Happy to talk with you about that. Reach out with an email, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and throw in alternative payment in the subject or something like that, and we'll try to get it done. All right, that's enough of that nonsense. If you want to skip ahead to my conversation with Mick West, it begins at about 9 minutes in. Oh, and also don't forget, it's Thursday, and so we will be hanging out tonight, 8 p.m. I'll be hosting a hangout for all subscribers. You should be getting a link. If you're not, email me and I'll send it to you on my special list of people who don't get the link. But right now, I want to give you a rundown on what happened yesterday, according to me. All right, well, the big story, at least, maybe, I don't know, I'm an East Coast elitist, but the haze that gripped vast swaths of the United States, discolored skies, ushered school children indoors, put hospitals on alert, peaked air pollution far beyond federal health standards, and there's not much the government can do about it other than warn us about the dangers. The primary cause, of course, smoke wafting downwind from more than 150 wildfires burning in Quebec province, Canada, with no immediate respite in sight. The plume is about as widespread as I've ever seen, said Paul Miller, executive director of the Northeast States for Coordinated Air Use Management, a Boston-based group of air pollution regulators from many of the states most directly affected. The episode ranks among the worst on record for the eastern U.S. I certainly don't remember anything like this ever in my life growing up in the Northeast. Also, of course, the latest manifestation of a trend that those regulators are effectively helpless to confront in the short term, bigger and longer lasting wildfires linked to the effects of climate change. Obviously, you West Coasters are making fun of us, saying, hold my beer, and other insulting and marginalizing type commentary. All of you live in the western states that are hotter and drier. But us East Coasters, we are soft, at least on this one. Absolutely shocking to smell it and to see it and to breathe it. and very depressing, really tough for a lot of people to take because you couldn't go outside and do all the things that you loved in one of the best parts of the year. And it seems like a harbinger. It seems like a canary. It seems like a real preview of what we might be seeing a lot more of. And so that's all I'll have to say about that, except for it's going to probably last a few more days. Other news, let's see. Yesterday we woke up, or in the afternoon, I think we found out that CNN CEO Chris Licht is gone. He's stepping down from the network, a 13-month, 10-year mark by low ratings, the firing of a major anchor, and an Atlantic magazine profile that made him look like a real shithead. Does this mean Don Lemon is coming back? I hope not, because I was no Don Lemon fan. I was actually happy to see him go, but I'm much happier to see Chris Licht go. Boot Licht, says Bill Boyle. I'll talk more about that with journalism professor from NYU, Jay Rosen, joining me for the first time on the podcast. One of the best journalism experts, professors, critics in the country, joining me on tomorrow's show. At least he's scheduled to. So that will be one of the main things that we discuss, along with a lot of other media stories, journalism stories, and really looking forward to that. Also, a brand of about a dozen right-wing insurrectionists in the House choked the floor action on the House of Representatives as a revenge for the debt deal, the mostly Trump-aligned Freedom Caucus. Now, working to derail senior Republicans' plans to pass even widely popular party priorities on the floor this week. They're preparing to make trouble beyond choking some floor action. More broadly, Kevin McCarthy's right flank is trying to reassert control over a large swath of the Republican agenda in the House. Already blocks of conservatives pushing Republican leaders to ramp up attacks on Biden administration officials while also pushing for spending cuts that will fall, which essentially renege on last week's debt deal. That is reporting from Politico. And I guess one of the big stories, the biggest stories, might be that federal prosecutors have notified Donald Trump in a letter that he is the target of a criminal investigation. And I think that means that is usually the clearest signal that you're about to be indicted, is what I'm reading. The special counsel, Jack Smith, or Beard, is on the verge of charging decision in his probe of the former president. Trump is under investigation for concealing reams of classified documents at his private estate and orchestrating a scheme to prevent federal authorities from finding them. At least that's what we think he's going to be indicted for first. There are, of course, other cases coming down the pike. Not so good for the former president. We'll see how he handles it. But this is huge news. It could come as soon as tomorrow. Also, it looks like Mark Meadows might have flipped. That's some interesting reporting that we're seeing. Steve Bannon was also subpoenaed in late May, apparently, for documents and testimony in the January 6th special investigation. That news broke just yesterday. And did I mention Chris Licht is out at CNN? I think I did. And finally, student debt relief update. We talked with Melissa Byrne yesterday. If you missed that episode, you can go back and listen to learn more. But President Biden just vetoed a bill that would have blocked the administration's one-time student debt relief plan. So that's really, really good news. And that's all the news that I've got for you on today's news update, because I want to bring you my conversation with Mick West. It is so good. And I can't bring it to you without your subscription again. More plugs. Sorry, that's what you get when you don't have ads. More plugs. StandUpWithPete.com is my website. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And I'm posted on YouTube. I'm working a lot more hours lately to get a lot more content up on more platforms. YouTube.com/StandUpWithPete. And I'm on TikTok, too. I have, 317 followers. I just started posting on TikTok, and I'm killing it. 317 followers. Check me out at Pete.Dominic on TikTok. I expect 300 more followers after I just plug that on the show. So look forward to seeing you there. All right. Well, Mick West is a British-American science writer, skeptical investigator, a retired video game programmer. He's the creator of websites Contrail Science and Metabunk. And he investigates and debunks pseudoscientific claims and conspiracy theories like chemtrails, UFOs, and so much more. His book is very, very good. Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect. You may have seen him on News Nation this week, or CBS, BBC, CNN, and I'm really excited to have him back here on the podcast. I think he's super smart. MickWest.com. Maybe it's just the British accent. No, he's very, very smart. And I think also he's not doing this for money. That's why I really admire him. That's why I like Bill Boyle as well. They aren't out there selling themselves and trying to make money. This guy is, my understanding, I mean, he suggests towards it, well, I think it's pretty public, that he had a huge video game development company that he sold for a lot of money, and that's allows him to do this work now that he's doing, debunking conspiracy theories and so on. And we're talking about this story from The Debrief. It's a website, a news outlet, which says it specializes in, quote, frontier science, describes itself as self-funded. They reported this week that a former intelligence official named David Grush said that the U.S. government has spent decades secretly recovering intact vehicles and partial fragments that weren't made by humans. Officials, Grush said, sought to avoid congressional oversight while reverse engineering these materials for the government's own purposes. He also said the military even discovered the, quote, dead pilots of these craft. Believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true, said David Grush. Well, guess what? Mick West doesn't think it's true. He doesn't think the article is true. Very critical of both of the authors of that article. I have listeners that don't necessarily agree. Shout out to Matt Elliott, who I had a long call with and look forward to hearing from after he listens to this interview. Let's do it right now with Mick West. All right, he is here. The great Mick West. Very excited to have you back on the show to talk about these issues, which I feel like nobody knows more about than you. How have you been, sir?
I've been doing good. It's interesting times, and I've been quite busy.
Well, you know, I wonder if maybe I missed it, but this latest story that we're going to talk about, this guy, David Grush, it seems like the biggest thing since, was it 2 years ago, where all those videos came out from the Navy? Or have there been a bunch of other stories on UFOs, or what do we call them now, that we've missed?
Yeah, it's actually been about 5 years ago now since the New York Times piece, which was also Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, same two authors who wrote the debrief piece about Dave Grush. So yeah, this is, I think, if this is true, what is being said, then it's definitely bigger than that. And so, there's a lot more interest and also a lot more scrutiny. And I think it really deserves a lot more scrutiny.
Why do you say that, if this is true, first of all? And also, why would this deserve more scrutiny than past stories, leaks, videos, tapes?
Well, if you look back at the previous story, say the New York Times story of 2017, it was, I think, December 2017. And that was written by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, but they essentially brought receipts. They brought these videos of craft, which were essentially official Navy videos that were of unidentified flying objects, and they had an interview with Lou Elizondo, who did actually work in some capacity on essentially some type of UFO investigation program. And so they have kind of a lot more back then than they do now. Right now, we have essentially one person. We have Dave Grush telling us that other people have told him that we have a reverse engineering program for crashed alien spacecraft, essentially, and that we have recovered alien bodies from those crashed spacecraft. And we have a very limited set of snippets of interviews with him, with this journalist, Ross Coulthart, who's an Australian journalist who's done a lot of stories on the UFO culture. And we know that they've been working together for some time, and they've been talking to other people. Like I've heard that Dave Grush has been to the Canadian government and talked to members of Parliament of the Canadian Parliament about this thing, and a kind of a roadshow where he's been going around with people like Gary Nolan and maybe Lou Elizondo, people like that. So there's this small group of people who are kind of relaying this narrative, but really all we have so far is essentially hearsay. We have someone who's credentialed. He worked in the intelligence community and he had clearances, and there are other people who will vouch for him. But we don't have any of the documents. We don't have any photo evidence. And he himself, Dave Grush, hasn't even seen the photos, of these supposed craft. So there's a lot of questions there. And, I think over the next few days and weeks, we'll hopefully learn some answers to that.
Dave Grush, apparently, he sounds like a really credible guy. He's a former combat officer in Afghanistan. He's a veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which I didn't know existed, and the National Reconnaissance Office. He served as the Reconnaissance Office's representative to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force from 19 to 21, 2019. From late 21 to 22, he was the NGA's co-lead for UAP analysis and its representative to the task force. And who would know more than this guy about what the government knows about these unidentified aerial phenomena?
Well, you'd think that the head of the UAP task force would, perhaps the head of AARO, perhaps the people who have testified to Congress already, like Scott Moultrie, people who do have clearances, people who are actually working on these things now. Dave Grush is retired from the service, and he's working on some other job in Colorado. So there's a lot of people. He's a young guy. I think he's quite young. He's like 35 or something. There's lots more people who have been in the government and the military a lot longer than he have, and people who would know a lot more about these programs than him. And as he has said himself, he never worked on the programs. He never worked on the crash recovery programs. He says he knows people who did. But when he was asked the other day on News Nation about what evidence was there that these craft were crashed alien technology, what he came up with was essentially the old talking points that we've heard before in UFO culture. He said that there were metals of unusual isotopic ratios. Normally on Earth, when you dig metal out of the ground, it comes in a specific ratio of like the two types of that metal, or maybe two or three types. As metal can be in different isotopes, which is just a slightly different configuration of that metal. And when you dig it out of the ground, it's in a specific ratio. So it's kind of like a signature of whether it's terrestrial or not. Now, you can actually make metals have different ratios of their isotopes, but you have to kind of engineer it. You'd have to mix the different metals isotopes together to get a specific ratio. So the evidence he comes up with is something that doesn't prove that it's from off-world. It's something that could have been made on this planet. And then he mentioned something about metals, heavy metals with high atomic numbers in odd configurations. And that really just sounds like this little chip of metal that people have been talking about for, I think, decades now. I think it goes back to Art Bell, the Art Bell radio show.
Oh,
when
yeah,
people
yeah.
anonymously sent him in like bits of metal that they said they'd found with ridiculous backstories about telepathy and contact with aliens and stuff like that. But this bit of metal's been floating around. It's a little triangular piece of metal, and it's layered zinc, magnesium, and bismuth. Zinc and bismuth are heavy metals, and bismuth has a high atomic number, so that kind of matches what he just described. But this isn't anything new. This is just the type of thing that people have been claiming as evidence for decades, but it never really went anywhere because these are things that could be manufactured on Earth. So the evidence that he had that they're aliens is just the same old stuff that we've heard before. And what about the bodies? I mean, if you got a crashed alien craft with aliens in it, surely that should be the best evidence that we're being visited by aliens. But no, it's just this old isotope nonsense.
Leslie Keane and this other gentleman who wrote this latest piece for The Debrief, Ralph Blumenthal. You mentioned several other names. Probably most people listening, I'm not familiar with most of those other names that you mentioned. But what about Leslie? I mean, where does her credibility lie? I remember reading that, I think, like 35-page New Yorker story, which included you in it, and I think that's how I discovered your work. But where does her? Tell me a little bit about her past. Do you think she's generally arguing in good faith with these articles, that she's been on this beat for a very long time? I don't know this other fellow that she co-wrote it with.
Yeah, I think she is. Both her and Ralph Blumenthal, I think, believe in what they write. But I think their belief in the broader picture of they both believe that there probably are some kind of extraterrestrials or some other non-human intelligence, and it covers a variety of things, is visiting us with UFOs. Her other author, Ralph Blumenthal, is a big fan of a psychiatrist called John Mack, who was really interested in abductions. And he would interview lots of people about abductions and people who had been visited by aliens. Sometimes there are mass sightings of aliens by school children in a schoolyard. Yeah, there's no real evidence it happened, but the school kids say it did, and he interviews them. And he's one of these people who believes in it. And Ralph Blumenthal's book was called The Believer, about John Mack. So, and I think that idea of someone being a believer in all these testimonies is something that typifies the UFO community, and I don't think Leslie Kean is an exception. Like, she's been writing about ufology and, to some degree, the paranormal for quite some time. Her last book was about life after death. I think that might have been what it was actually called. And she wrote a book before that, which is about, I think, UFOs, generals, and the military, something along those lines. But it was about how she talked to people high up in the military who believed that UFOs were real. And, hence she saw that as being evidence that the UFOs and aliens are real. So, all these people that are involved in promoting and writing and distributing this story right now are people who have a pre-existing belief that aliens are visiting us.
I think it's, for me, it's most important to know the source of any information, which is why you are here. Her book, by the way, that book you referenced, I think, is titled Surviving Death, A Journalist Investigates Evidence for an Afterlife.
Yes, that's the one. That's the latest book. And she's been into that type of thing. She goes to seances as a journalist, but she essentially seems to think that there's something to them. When you go to a seance, like a medium materializes things, and there are disembodied hands touching you, and from her accounts of that, she seems to believe that there's some legitimacy to that, which doesn't seem like a super scientific way of looking at things. And I think perhaps some of that attitude might carry over to her work on UFOs.
You're a scientific guy. I'm a guy who likes scientific guys. And I think what you're saying is, if I had some kind of an experience, a paranormal experience, and I believed I have it, and I mean, I know a lot of people who do. I wish I had one. I always wish. I'll sleep in a Civil War battlefield to see a ghost. I really want that to happen. But the point of what you're saying is, people can have those experiences, and they can 110% believe that it happened. But science has been unable to prove those types of things, like the hands touching your body, or pretty much anything like that, paranormal experiences. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with, say, seances, for example, is that it's got a long history of charlatans. And a seance basically is a stage magician operating with the great advantage, usually, of it being in a very dimly lit or an entirely dark room, just performing magic tricks usually to a paying audience who think that he or she is connecting them with dead spirits. So there's a long history of people faking this, and there's also a long history of people exposing it, so like debunkers and skeptics, like going back to Harry Houdini. Harry Houdini, he was a stage magician, but he never claimed to be actually performing magic, and he got quite angry at these mediums, and he would go to the seances and try to expose them. There's a credulity, I think, that comes with like believing in subjects like that, which perhaps doesn't make you an ideal person to investigate claims about something that you already believe in.
Why do you think you're such an ideal person, Mick West? Because I do. I mean, I've been watching your stuff, read your book. Like, I mean, people say, let's see, as soon as you're, by the way, one of these people, not unlike Let me think. Like a Michael Mann, he's a climate scientist friend of mine. Peter Hotez, who, of course, is a vaccine expert and doctor friend of mine. You're in that category where if I tweet or retweet something that you wrote, an army of people come to discredit you in this case. Yeah. You deal with these people on a very regular basis. One guy said, well, Mick doesn't have all the information. I was like, well, who does? Like, what journalist does? Who has all of the information? Who do you possibly trust then?
Yeah, well, what I do is look at the information that's actually available. What's the public information that's out there? Especially things like UFO videos. And my background is a software engineer in the video game industry, which may not seem like much. Like Mick West is just a game designer. People say that all the time, but you actually have a kind of a unique set of skills as a video game programmer. Like just the simple act of making a 3D object display on a 2D screen is the exact same math that you need for analyzing UFO videos, because you're taking a 2D screen and trying to recreate where it is in 3 dimensions. And the simple physics that we use in video games is what you need to analyze things like the position and the size and the motion, the acceleration of objects in these videos. So, I've been doing that type of thing for 20, 30 years, and it overlapped with my interest in UFOs. And so I got pretty good at analyzing UFO videos. And just along with that, I'm naturally a skeptical person. So it doesn't mean I disbelieve everything, but it means that I need to see the evidence for things.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest criticism that people have of me is that I don't listen to the eyewitnesses. But I do listen to the eyewitnesses. But unfortunately, I also recognize that eyewitness testimony isn't the most reliable evidence. And if we have hard evidence like videos, we really should go and analyze that first and see if that actually tells us anything, and then see how the eyewitness testimony fits into the context of that.
So well said. I mean, your background, obviously, it's kind of who would expect that, but it's actually perfect in terms of understanding certainly these videos. But you also seem to understand, I don't know if you're self-taught or if you've referenced others, physics. When it comes to these videos, you understand physics, and you also really understand photography and video and how it works. Explain a little bit about how that helps you. I mean, most people see these videos, I think you'll agree, I certainly did, the ones from a few years ago, and say, this is completely unexplainable. This has to be from some other world. And then I read your explanation. It doesn't mean I completely understand it, but it's a pretty good explanation debunking these things. Tell me a little bit more about your understanding of physics and cameras and lenses as to how that helps you explain these videos, especially away, because they seem pretty damning.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a combination of things. I've always been interested in photography. I've had a good camera since I was in my teens, a very long time ago.
You still do. Look at you. I can see the pores in your skin. You have the best camera of any guest I've ever had. The guy knows what he's doing. Go ahead. Sorry, Mick.
It's I like the camera I have here. I have a whole bunch of different cameras up on the shelf. It's the video game stuff teaches you about essentially animation. Animation, of course, you draw one frame, then you go to the next frame, you draw things in a different position. But that's essentially what videos are. Videos are a series of photographs. You get 30 per second, or 25 per second, or 24, or 29.97 per second, depending on the type of camera you're using. And I understand how that works exactly, because I do that from the ground up. When you're making a video game, you're creating these frames from information. So I know how to take a video and then deconstruct it into its actual frames. So I can take this frame here and this frame here, and I know if something's moved from here to here, that indicates either it's moving at that speed, or that the camera is rotating by a certain amount, or that the camera is moving a certain amount, or that it's a combination of 2 or 3 of those different things. And that's something that I think that a lot of people, just looking at a video, they don't naturally understand. If you take, for example, one of the more recent videos, this Middle East sphere, which has been shown on TV quite a lot alongside Dave Grush's interviews. It's like a silvery ball, and there's this video, the cameras focus on a building, and then this ball zips into the frame, and then the camera operator tries to follow this ball. And it's drone footage shot in the Middle East. And so people are kind of saying, oh, this is a metallic sphere that's exhibiting highly anomalous behavior. And you could kind of understand that interpretation if you don't really know much about how cameras work. But when you start actually analyzing this particular video, first of all, you've got to recognize that the camera's mounting on an MQ-9 Reaper drone, which means that the camera itself is moving at about 150 miles per hour, which it's not super fast for a plane, but it's very fast for something moving over the ground. And then you got to look at this metallic orb and see how big is this. You can see in the background there's some telegraph poles behind it, and it's about a bit less than twice the width of that, which means that this orb is only about 18 inches across. And then you take the camera's motion into account, and you see that the camera's moving in a certain direction, and the plane's banked a certain way, and you see, oh, look, the motion of this object kind of mirrors the expected motion of the plane. And that all leads to the idea that this is not an orb kind of zipping around all over the place. This is just a balloon floating in the wind, doing nothing really special, and all the motion you're seeing is because you've got this super zoomed camera. And that's another thing you learn about in video games is depth of field and field of view. So we know that you can zoom in on something very far away, and it gives this really weird illusion of parallax, and it makes things look like they're moving when they're actually not. It's just the camera moving. So all these things combined together, I can kind of tell what's going on in this video, but it's kind of a little difficult to explain to people because people are not used to putting their mind into that 3D frame of reference.
I don't know.
So
I think
a bit of a challenge.
I think you just explained it well here, but that's not being explained in other places, including by a lot of journalists, it would seem, who report this stuff out.
Yeah, and including by the people you think would know better as well. It was a very surprising mistake that Sean Kirkpatrick made at the NASA hearing recently. He was showing a new video that I'd never seen before of something that was initially thought to be anomalous. And you saw these three dots on the screen, and they're moving back and forth like this. And it looks really weird, what's going on there. And he explains it, that this is just the camera moving, and it makes these objects look like they're moving. And then someone asked him, what are all these little white dots in the background? Because you could see that they were moving because there was these white dots in the background that weren't moving, and this was moving relative to that. And he said, those are stars. I think those are stars. But it was obvious to me that they were not stars. It was literally impossible for them to be stars based on his explanation, because he said the 3 dots were distant planes, and they were all moving because the camera was moving, but these white dots were not. And I tweeted something about it, about how ridiculous his explanation was. And then after the break, he actually came back and said, I'm not actually that sure about that anymore. But he never even really fully retracted it. So you see a lot of that in these videos that they show. With the other video he showed, I'm not sure if it was at that hearing or the other one, was shot from one drone, and there's another drone in the distance, and then you see this other object zip by really rapidly. And he said, this is something that we originally thought was anomalous. So the task force was actually fooled by this parallax illusion at some point. I think there's actually a lot more of this mistaken identification of anomalous behavior than we actually think. And so when they talk about these spheres are demonstrating apparent anomalous behavior, I'd like to see what they're actually talking about, because their track record so far hasn't been very good.
That's shocking and disconcerting to hear that experts at NASA have a harder time explaining it than you. Do you reach out when you see that?
This wasn't the NASA expert, though. Just to be clear, this was Sean Kirkpatrick, who is the head of AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which is the Pentagon. not NASA.
Got it. Head of the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office and Harvard professor Avi Loeb teamed up to write that these objects, which appear to defy all physics, could be probes from an extraterrestrial parent craft. Jesus.
They could. I mean, how do we know that they are not? I mean, basically that they're extrapolating science and science fiction there. It's like, how would you populate the universe if you wanted to? You would send out these what you call von Neumann machines, which are self-replicating machines which fly to another world, and then they set up a base, and then they replicate themselves, and then they make other little big von Neumann machines that fly off to other worlds. This is a staple of both science and science fiction. So what they're basically doing there is kind of riffing on that idea. It's nothing special. But then they mix it all up in a paper that actually is really talking about how if objects are moving very fast in the atmosphere, it would create plasma, and so you'd be able to see them glowing, and you'd hear sonic booms, and we don't see or hear that. Therefore, maybe these objects are not actually moving as fast as they appear. Now, that's a good point. But they wrap it all up in this mothership seeding dandelions of panspermia, seeding of planets. It's weird.
It is weird. And I'm not sure if when I asked my last question, when you said it could be that, if you were being sarcastic or if you were being just generous.
No, I'm not being sarcastic.
You're saying it could be what they're saying, but you don't see the evidence for it.
Yeah, I don't see any evidence at all, and it seems very unlikely that this would just be happen to be the one moment in history that alien craft are visiting this particular spot in the universe when we see no evidence of life anywhere else in the universe. But it's not something that you can rule out. You could think, what are the odds, for example, that we are the only life that exists in the entire universe? I think that's unlikely. But I don't think it's something that you could actually rule out, because it's a possibility. Because if it's just entirely random, then we don't know what the odds of life arising are. And even if the odds are quite high, sometimes in one iteration of the universe, there might be one that life only arises once. So you can't rule out things just because they seem unlikely. So I always try to basically keep a list of possibilities when I'm talking about what something might be. If you take, say, the gimbal UFO video, it's probably, I think, based on my analysis, just a distant plane. It might be something that's moving in a really weird manner that's also kind of hot. And that thing that's moving in a really weird manner might be an alien spaceship. Of course, the distant plane might be an alien spaceship as well. It's, these are things that you can't rule out. But since we don't really have any evidence of that, and we've got a vast amount of evidence that humans do things in the world, it seems vastly more likely that what we're looking at is a human craft.
You shared a tweet from Eric Weinstein. Not sure who he is, but I feel like he's kind of conspiracy guy too. But
Eric is.
Isn't he problematic?
He's a mathematician. He's kind of like a member of what's called the intellectual dark web.
Right.
He likes asking questions. He has a podcast called The Portal, where he talks a lot with people. And he kind of waded into the UFO world maybe a year or so ago. And I think because he's something of a kind of a well-known online intellectual, he got courted by the UFO crowd, probably the same people who have courted Dave Grush. And they promised him that they would show him evidence of basically crashed alien technology, that they were going to take him to a place in the desert or something. This is what he says. And this happened a few times. But as he described it, it was like, Lucy and the football. He's the Charlie Brown in this scenario, and they were always promising that he's going to get to kick the ball, but every time he goes for it, it was snatched away from him. So he became a bit more cynical. And the tweet that I retweeted was basically him warning about the current situation.
I'll just read it real quick, and then you can. He writes, there's an enormous complex of unbelievably highly conserved narratives to which very sober people will personally attest. This is but one of them. I can assure you there are many others. What is more, they are seemingly not all consistent with each other. This puts informants in conflict with each other. What's happening now is that they seem to be crossing the Rubicon of sworn testimony given under oath. That means something will now happen. But keep in mind, one possibility is disinformation. Word to the wise, demand hard evidence before giving belief. There's a ton of, quote, smoke and mirrors out here intended to incinerate credibility. You have been warned. All right. Outside of you have been warned.
That's a complicated thing. So, in part, he's talking about his own experience, where people have told him things, and he recognizes that there are variants in this, and people within the UFO community don't all agree with each other. He did a kind of an interview with a physicist called Hal Puthoff, who's well known in the UFO community as being someone who makes these types of claims, the exact type of claims that we've had for decades. And Hal Puthoff was telling him about how he could easily demonstrate psychic powers, and Eric was pretty much incredulous about this. But this is all part of this backdrop of all these different people who are involved in ufology. And so I think because he's been courted by people, he's been hearing a lot of different stories. One of those stories is the whole UFO thing, or at least part of the UFO thing, is a disinformation campaign by the US government. So when you hear a story about a UFO, it's actually a cover for something else, perhaps some kind of advanced technology test that we have. Or it's perhaps a cover for the truth about UFOs. Perhaps the government does have secret relations with a government of another star system, which is one of the things that some people claim. Or perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps this is all smoke and mirrors. Some people claim that what we are seeing are essentially visitors from another dimension who are creating UFOs as kind of a smokescreen for their existence, or to do something for some purpose, kind of a trickster scenario. And this is people like Jacques Vallée, who is a mentor of Gary Nolan, and Gary Nolan is one of the people who is behind Dave Grush. So you've got these overlapping narratives that are difficult to reconcile, and that's kind of what Eric is talking about. And he's saying use caution. And I would certainly advise anybody who's looking into this topic and is talking to anybody on this topic, me included, everybody, use caution, because there are a lot of conflicting narratives and they can't all be true. And personally, I feel the more extreme narratives are all nonsense, and the reality is much more mundane. But what do I know?
A lot, which is why I'm talking to you. And I share that. I've always shared that. But having learned of your work and a few others, on other subjects, I think that's critical thinking. I think that's logical, what you're saying, to come to that outcome. He mentions, and I know a lot about this, the kind of competing narratives. A lot of the players, you've mentioned many of them in the UFO world for years. And I think what he's saying and what you're saying is they constantly debunk each other. There's not a lot of synergy with their own theories. They're often at odds and incongruent with each other. Is that what he's saying? Is that what you think? What you see? Yeah,
no, definitely. I mean, the UFO community has people in it who the UFO community kind of lauds as heroes, but they kind of disagree with each other. Like take George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell. These are the people who are behind UFO video releases, like the Green Triangle video, and the more recent one of 5 bright lights in the sky at 29 Palms, which turned out to be flares, that are being leaked to them by military personnel. But they are big supporters of Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar is this old figure in the community who claims basically exactly the same thing as Grush. And yet most people in the UFO community, well, I'm not saying most, but a lot of people in the UFO community discount Bob Lazar's testimony because it's just basically full of holes. He made up stuff about his academic credentials and things like that. And he used to work in a whorehouse and we got arrested for some type of whorehouse related activity. And he has all kinds of dodgy things in his background, which kind of like are issues with his credibility. So you've got like a couple of the key players supporting him, and you got a lot of the other key players who just won't touch him because he's kind of tainted goods. And so you got these different narratives. And I think it becomes like almost like you choose your own adventure. It's like
right.
you who do you believe? Which one of these narratives do you think is the correct one? Like there was one on I think like 4chan cropped up recently, and it was this really kind of I don't know, enticing possibility. Like the idea was that an alien mothership landed on Earth thousands of years ago and set up a base underneath the Pacific and set up a kind of a replication shop under the Pacific. This kind of von Neumann scenario. And has been spying on Earth using these little metallic spheres for thousands of years, basically.
Oh, I like it.
And this is, it's obviously one of the more ridiculous scenarios, but a bunch of people are like, yeah, this sounds legit. This would explain a lot. And yeah, it's not that far fetched compared to some of the stuff that the high level people are talking about. Like, Gary Nolan talks about interdimensional beings. Yeah, there's a lot, and Gary Nolan, he's a very interesting character. He's a very smart guy. He's a professor, and he's got lots of patents, and he works in I think computational immunobiology. Like, so he does making drugs and gene therapies and stuff like that. All very great stuff, advancing the health of people. But he's also a UFO experiencer who had little men visit him in his bedroom when he was a child and saw UFOs and has had experiences with entities kind of talking to him. And now he's part of this whole thing where he's kind of introducing Dave Grush to people. So it's there's a lot of different people in this scenario.
So much of it seems, again, I haven't been that interested in these things, frankly, until I found your work, because I think your book and your interviews really go a long way to explain so much of why people think what they think and how to debunk it and how to follow it up. And I've always been into myth busting for sure. But more importantly, when it comes to things like your health and other issues where I've been talking to experts for a long time. But you're the man on this. You're the guy on this. And your book really went a long way to explain this. But that being said, it does feel like you have to get to the starting point, the entry point for a lot of folks is the government, the U.S. government, Israeli government, any government, frankly. They know these things. They're hiding these things. And I will never, ever believe that. I don't believe that human beings are capable of that. And for one reason, because there's been complex conspiracies that people, ended up talking about, from Nixon, everywhere. Like, we've heard people eventually blow the whistle. People eventually tell the truth. You can't keep these secrets. But people give so much credit to government agencies. And by the way, the last point I would say is not only does the government keep this secret, it keeps it over generations, meaning something that happened 50 or 75 years ago is being kept secret. And none of the presidents know, and none of the agency heads know. And I feel like that's the entry point. And if you believe that, I say, my personal opinion is, well, you've lost trust with me, because it's not how we don't work that way. Human beings don't work that way. Governments don't work that way. They're not nearly as efficient and secretive as people think they might be. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's not just the U.S. government. This narrative that's currently being played out is that other countries also have crash retrieval programs. Russia has them, China has them, Britain probably has them, and all these other countries. They all know about it. So the amount of people who would know about what's actually going on, essentially like a shadow reality of science and the entire world, is just ridiculous. Science doesn't work like that. How you can't really compartmentalize science, so they don't realize that they're being fed bits of UFOs, and that's how scientific discoveries are made. No, scientific discoveries are made by hard work, building on the work of others. And it just doesn't really make any sense. And then there's countries who don't have crash retrieval programs. They do have like surveillance programs, and they spy on other countries, and they would want to expose something like this. How do we stop like Iran and North Korea and other countries like that? Pakistan and India. Like, why aren't they involved in this? There's just so many people that would be involved. Even if you would just take the US alone, there would be tens of thousands of people. This entirely like separate set of people. And now, it's sure, like now you could say somebody has come forward. Someone's actually, broken the barrier, but we haven't actually seen that yet. We've seen someone make some claims that somebody told him some things. And now he's gone to Congress and apparently has given some testimony, and they're going to look into it. What I anticipate happening is that as is my best guess, what I anticipate happening is that he's going to say, we have alien remains at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we have these programs of studying it. These are the names of the programs. They're in this hangar. And then the military is going to come back and say, oh, those aren't alien remains. That was a crashed MiG-29. This was a recovered submarine. This was a satellite that crashed in Canada.
And the reason why it's being kept there is those are all foreign, and that's why it's being kept secretive.
Exactly, and it's there are big programs that do this. There's what used to be called the Foreign Technology Exploitation Group, which is now called, I think, NAISIC, NAISIC, and they're basically a very large organization that's dedicated to capturing foreign technology and studying foreign technology and reverse engineering it, both for defending against it and for learning anything that we can from it. And these are top secret, super duper top secret. Sure. We don't want our adversaries to know that we're studying their stuff. We don't know that. We certainly don't know that if we figure anything out about it. So these will be very compartmentalized programs. And some of these are big programs. When we recovered that Russian submarine back in, I think it was like 1976, that was like something that cost like over $3 billion in today's money. So these aren't like small programs. These are big programs with lots of people. And if it was alien technology that we were recovering, the amount of people and the amount of money we'd be putting into this would be just ludicrous, because it's something that would change the entire world forever. Yeah, all we've got is like some guy saying, I think that these programs here are doing alien stuff. And then the military is going to come back and tell Congress secretly, because they can't reveal it to the public, that no, it's not. And then Congress is going to be like, oh, well, the military has told us this. And then Tim Burchett is going to say, well, I don't believe them. They're lying. It's a big cover up. And then the whole thing is just going to continue.
It's what they're saying in this latest, I believe, is that, I think Rush is saying this, is that those agencies that reverse engineer a captured Chinese Russian sub, what they're doing is they're reverse engineering these alien crafts. And when I hear that, again, not knowing anything about physics or weaponry or technology, my immediate response to that is, it's one thing to reverse engineer another object built on planet Earth with the same raw materials. It's a completely different thing to imagine recreating or rebuilding a foreign craft where you don't have the same raw materials. You can't even identify what they might be. Again, I know nothing, but it seems ridiculous to think that you can reverse engineer some spacecraft or object that was built in another world.
Yeah, certainly not as easily as you could something. Say if you capture a MiG or something like that, or a fifth generation fighter from China,
right?
Yes, you could reverse engineer that relatively easy. But if it's something that's 10,000 years or a million years more advanced in technology, then maybe not. But you could learn stuff from it. You could study it, and you could actually do experiments, and you could get results. If you have something physical, you can actually figure things out. The claim is that we have bodies of the aliens. You can do biological analysis. You can see, what are these aliens made of? Do they have similar DNA to us? Are they in fact humans from the future or another dimension? So there are things that you can do, and material analysis is part of it. But the fact that the material analysis is the only evidence that he said of alienness just seems ridiculous. If you have an alien craft that landed, you've got an intact alien craft that can supposedly do things, and there'll be things in it. It's not just going to be an inert lump of metal when it lands. It's going to be something that actually has some technology that you can look at and describe. Of course, the good excuse for that will be that it is just an inert lump of metal. It's just like some kind of intelligent metamaterial, and that's all that it is. So there's always an excuse for these things. But if all you've got is an inert lump of metal, how do you know it's alien? It's just it's kind of you're going around in circles here. We don't have good evidence. We have hearsay, and Congress needs to tread very lightly when it's dealing with this. Well, they want to tread very heavily. Actually, they want to get their boots on and start stomping around looking for the real evidence. This guy is a 35-year-old guy retired from the intelligence community. There are probably thousands of people in the intelligence community with the same clearance or higher than him.
Right.
Why doesn't Congress just get one of them and ask them? Or get the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and ask them, or get whoever's in charge of these programs and ask them.
Right.
I mean, presumably that's what's going to happen. But the truth will out, but because it's classified, we may never actually hear what the truth is, other than that. It didn't really go anywhere.
I hope you're wrong about that. Who in Congress is pursuing these leads and treading, quote, heavily, as you say?
Well, there's a variety of people. There's Marco Rubio is one of them. He was the head of the Senate Select Committee of Intelligence, I believe. There's other people. Mark Warner, who's his Democratic counterpart. Senator Gillibrand has been pursuing it, and Tim Burchett, is Republican, has also been very interested in it. But they all seem to have kind of different takes and motives about the whole thing. I think Gillibrand's thing is about supporting the troops. Burchett's thing is that there's a vast government cover up of UFO visits that go back to biblical times. And Marco Rubio, I think, is just kind of, I don't know. I don't think he really believes it, but he thinks that it's something that you should look into. And similar with Warner.
Have any of them ever reached out to you?
No one high up has ever reached out to me.
Have you ever reached out to any of them?
No, because I wouldn't expect them to reply to me. They'll just think I'm some crank. And I'm sure they get emails from cranks all the time, and it would be kind of a waste of time. And if they want to talk to people, they should reach out to people who know about the topic, not me, and get these people to recommend who should they talk to.
Right.
And my name might come up, or it might be someone like Seth Shostak, who was former head of SETI, or maybe even Sean Kirkpatrick. Talk to Sean Kirkpatrick and get him to tell you exactly what's going on. Or talk to the head of the NSA. Talk to people who are very high security clearances. You're a congressperson, you get to do this. And especially the people who are on these committees, these intelligence committees.
Let me go down the rabbit hole. All those people have reason to protect the secrets. That's their job, to protect the secrets. They're not going to tell you, as opposed to a, quote, whistleblower like David Grush, who's left the government. What do you say to that?
Well, get the president involved then. Get the president to go and ask them. They have to tell him if he asks. It's not impossible for these things to be discovered. There was a big investigation called the Church Commission, I think back in the 70s. which uncovered a lot of essentially wrongdoing by the CIA and the intelligence community, and there were some reforms that came out of that. But if you structure things right, you can get access to these things. People talk about how Sean Kirkpatrick, head of Arrow, only has Title 10 clearance. He needs Title 50. Yeah, so if you want things to move forward, give him Title 50 clearance, or find someone with Title 50 clearance. It's not like there's none of these people existing in the intelligence community.
Right.
Get one of them to come before the congressional committee and testify. Right. Get one of them, say, well, we want you to look into these things that this Grush guy has just given us. It's going to happen. These things are going to happen. The only question is, what is the public going to find out? Is the most likely thing, I think, is that really nothing happens and things continue to be debated in public, whereas behind the scenes, it's just like, oh my God, not this nonsense again.
Right.
But yeah, we'll see.
Mick, I could talk to you forever. I appreciate you joining me today. I highly encourage everybody to get your book and follow you on Twitter. I'll say all that stuff on the way out. Thank you so much for joining me, man.
Thank you. It's been an interesting conversation, interesting times.
Yes, sir. All right, Mick West, what did you think? Matt Elliott, what did you think? Everybody else, I look forward to hearing from you at tonight's Hangout, which takes place at 8 p.m. Would love to have you join us if you've never joined us. Tonight is your night. Come on by. You'll get a link if you're a Patreon subscriber. If you're not getting that link, let me know, and I will email it directly to you along with a short list of other folks who, for whatever reason, don't get the link but are paid subscribers. Look forward to seeing you there and talking more about this and anything else that we've talked about on the show or not. We always have a great time talking about anything. Nonsense, BS, making each other laugh, and always politics, news, topical, current events, culture stories. So let's do it. See you tonight, and let's wrap it up there. There you go. Your quote of the day. How about one from Marcus Aurelius? I'm getting all into the Stoics. I'm a big Ryan Holiday fan. If you don't know his work, check it out. But he is reinterpreting the Stoics for modern day life. Here's one from Marcus Aurelius. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. All right. Ooh, I like that one a lot. All right, that's it. John Carroll taking us out. See you tonight.
Rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.